everybody? Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well. So, in recent time, we've been talking a lot about winter weather and the potential for severe weather. Well, as you can see here, it's getting a little bit busier. We have two slight risks to talk about. We have marginal risk today, which I wouldn't expect a whole lot out of. We haven't really had much in the way of reports today, and I wouldn't be surprised if we got maybe about 5 to 10 total severe reports in general. I do think that for the most part today we're going to be dealing with maybe an isolated wind and hail threat here and there. But anywhere from Birmingham towards the Gulf Coast, all the way over towards maybe Mobile, and maybe even extreme, like eastern parts of Louisiana, just outside of New Orleans, there could be a chance of an odd severe storm or two. And then over towards the Houston area, heading towards southern Texas, maybe that could be a point of interest as well. That includes San Antonio as well. For the most part, tornado and the wind threat is going to be the main threat, if anything even occurs with that. I'm honestly thinking that there's not going to be much to talk about with this, but marginal risk, especially last year, have had the tendency of overperforming. But given the kind of environment that we have today, where a lot of the surface temperatures are going to be colder, not much in the way of kinematics, nothing really kind of popping out at anyone right now, at any of these areas right now, I should say. I don't really think much is going to occur. We get towards day two, the environment's a little bit better. There are some limiting factors with that. Lapse rates are not overly steep with this, but they're sufficient enough to support severe weather and all hazards at that. But for the most part, we're going to be concerned particularly about the tornado wind threat once again. The convective mode is going to be a key factor in which threat ends up being the dominant threat. I do think overall we'll see probably more damaging winds than anything else, but there is a chance with the tornado threat, if we have prefrontal cells that kind of pop up, or embedded cells within the linear mode that's going to eventually take over later, that may increase the numbers of tornado warnings and possibly even tornado touchdowns as well. But I expect this to remain relatively low. There are also a couple of unknowns to go along with this, hence why we're doing this video. As we get towards day three, things kind of quiet down a little bit. This is going to be the remnants of our day two threat as we watch it pass through the Atlanta metro and most of Georgia and heading into South Carolina. Then things get a little bit more interesting as we get towards day five here. Very broad slight risk area once again, and this environment has actually looked a lot better on models than the Tuesday environment. However, they do look very similar in some ways. There are some limiting factors. Lapse rate's not going to be overly steep. The biggest pickup that I've gotten off of this has really come in the way of CAPE, or convective available potential energy. This is a great measure of instability within the atmosphere here. This area has actually been extended since the last time I discussed it in the video yesterday. We now have Nashville even involved in this at this point, along with Chattanooga. We still have western parts of Georgia here, especially northwest Georgia, in the mix here. Just about all of Alabama, all of Mississippi involved in this as well, and a good chunk of Louisiana as well. Those are pretty much the only real changes that I've had with this setup here. Now, the thing to make note of with this setup also is, like with Tuesday, the convective mode is going to determine a lot of what we end up seeing. For the most part, I would expect damaging winds to be the main threat. The tornado threat is going to be largely dependent on the convective mode that we end up getting. If we end up going linear, if we have embedded supercells, that does increase the tornado threat. And then also any prefrontal cells will help increase that threat as well. So mainly going to be looking in particular for prefrontal cells and mergers at this point as we go forward. But these are the main two threats that I'm looking at. As we go further along here, as you can see, the probability and predictability drops off notably here. So first things first, we'll go ahead and address the day two threat, and then we'll kind of go on from that point here. So as you can see on the screen here, we're going to fast forward about 20 hours out. This is heading into tomorrow morning. You can see where our trough is right now. Not a super stout trough like the one we're going to be seeing on Saturday, but still potent enough to help cause severe weather. The main thing that I've picked up on this latest model run here has a lot to do more with the short waves that we end up seeing as we go further along into the day. This is getting into the mid-afternoon into the early evening hours. You can see a shortwave pop up over here towards Alabama, along with the diffluence that we see along with diffluence that you can see on the screen. which is these little blotches that you're seeing right here where the color kind of fades out just ever so slightly. And then the same thing can be said over here, over towards central Mississippi. These areas a little further to the south, I think, will have the greatest amount of instability available. So a little bit of discrepancy in regards to where we have our forcing mechanism for storms to fire and kind of prosper for in comparison to the areas where we have the greatest instability and moisture return, etc. So we'll watch this head out, and then of course, as you can see, we still have a pretty prominent shortwave that pops up over here, even as we get into Georgia by the time we get into the overnight hours. But by this point, the instability is going to drop off. So it could be a marginal risk as we get into early Thursday morning, but I wouldn't expect this to be so significant that it would interfere too greatly with people's days. Just be watchful early in the morning, just in case you have a slightly stronger storm than the garden variety that we're used to seeing here. Now, getting into the mid-levels of the atmosphere is where things kind of get interesting here. And this is where my questions with the tornado threat kind of arise a bit. As we look at the environment overall, it mainly has a lot to do with these wind barbs here. If we were to go back and take a look at the 500 millibar map, as you can see, there's a variance in the speed shear that we have towards the region here. Speed shear is changing wind speeds at different heights of the atmosphere. As you can see at this point, as we get later into the evening, we have 84 knots wind speed there. Make that, and if we make the comparison, let's go ahead and jump to that same time frame here. You can see the slight drop off in wind speed there. So we have speed shear. This is 60 knots towards the very similar region that we were looking at earlier. 59 to 60 knots. We'll give it a little bit of variance, let's say. But you'll notice if you look at the wind barbs, they're pointing in a relatively similar direction here. They're pointing off towards the northeast here. So the directional shear is a big factor when it comes to tornado genesis. And for the most part, when we look towards these two levels of the atmosphere, especially towards the upper to mid levels, it doesn't matter quite as much until we get towards the lower levels. But as you can see here, this kind of leans more into the damaging wind threat than anything else here. Really a key factor in all of this is going to have more to do with the lower level jet, which we'll get into in a second. But you can actually get a better look at the shortwave that pops up over here as we get into the mid to late afternoon here as well. Again, this is a very good forcing mechanism, and forcing or lift is a key factor in severe weather here. So pretty good reason as to why there was a slight risk issued. Like I said, not too sure about the tornado threat, especially for the areas further off towards the north and east, let's say towards the Alabama-Georgia line. I mean, I do think that there's a little bit more in the way of directional shear here, but definitely not too much of anything that stands out to me. There's going to be little pockets here and there that we'll keep an eye out for, but this definitely doesn't have anything at this point that screams out tornado outbreak of any kind, which is good news, of course. You never want to really see that. So my question again really kind of draws back to the low level jet here. Now typically when I'm looking at a big severe weather event or a tornado outbreak, I'm looking for the low level jet to kind of be a little bit more of a north to south motion. You can kind of see that a little bit over here towards the Atlanta metro, but storms aren't going to be in this region by that point unless we get some prefrontal development. While that can happen, I would find it rather unlikely at this point. But as we get later into the evening, this little area right here kind of captures my interest right around 01Z. But again, that really depends on how quickly this storm system progresses. If this were to ramp up in its speed, we could have a little something going here. But as a whole here, low level jet, there's plenty of speed shear. Nice little variance in speed. We're at about 40 knots here. So good difference in speed between all three levels of the atmosphere that we've looked at so far. The question really is the turning of the winds with height. The directional shear is the key factor here. And I think that's one of the things we may be missing out on. Like I said, if anything, that's a good thing. And then here comes the frontal boundary, which you can kind of see here. Because the low level jet kind of maxes out as that front's passing through. Usually by this time, though, we start to lose the instability and a lot of the thermodynamics, which are another key factor for severe weather. So if we watch that move out, severe threat's going to drop off. So now, let's go ahead and take a look at our warm sector over the course of the next 24 hours. That's going to be a key factor in our severe weather development as well. Like I said, over towards this environment, further towards the north, it's not really all that impressive. Usually when it comes to severe weather events, especially warmer core severe weather events as well, we tend to really look for temperatures that are in the mid 60s and above. Usually when we have those kinds of temperatures, we have a good enough moisture return to go along with it, especially considering with where the surface low often will set up, which we'll get into in a moment. But as you can see here, the 60s and 70s stay relatively mitigated over towards the Gulf Coast and southern half of the states of Mississippi and Alabama, Georgia as well. So, like I said, I really think that this area could be trimmed off a little bit further towards the north based off of the thermodynamics. The kinematics are what are helping keeping some areas like Birmingham and maybe even as far east as the northwest Atlanta suburbs in play at this point. Anywhere, I would say, I'm going to try and draw a line here, but I would say anywhere around this region, I think the tornado threat really starts to heighten, especially where we have those warmer surface temperatures to go along with it. But anywhere else, though, I'd say that the tornado threat is going to be a little bit more on the marginal side. And watch how this coincides really well with the dew points that we're going to be seeing. This is going to be our moist sector. As we go into the day tomorrow, you can see a nice little spike that pops up over here. And I think this also could be a factor that keeps things in play, but where we have those dew points below 55, I think we're kind of asking for a bit much in regards to severe weather potential. It could be a bit of a reach, but again, this is kind of one of those things where you could end up having a nowcast situation where the very last minute you can get a little bit of an uptrend. Because look how far to the north this has gone now. If you made the comparison between the model run yesterday in comparison to the day, we've had a little bit of an uptrend here. And there's still time for maybe another. So we'll have to keep an eye on this, of course. But overall, like I said, anywhere south of that line that I had drawn just a little bit ago, I think will be the point of interest in regards to severe weather further towards the north. I'm a little bit more skeptical, but we'll have to see how things pan out. Another reason I'm skeptical is because the instability. Instability just doesn't really seem like it makes it that far to the north here. It's Atlanta Metro right here. It's Birmingham Metro right here. Like I said, you just don't really get a whole lot out of this. It really stays mitigated more or less over towards the Gulf Coast and over towards the extreme southern part of the states here. So, for the most part, I'm thinking mainly just outside of Louisiana, maybe even towards southern Mississippi, the environment's a little bit more ideal for tornadoes. But again, even then, looking at this, the directional shear I think comes into play. The speed shear is definitely there. A good example is looking at this sounding here. The 0 to 1 kilometer shear is at 26. Usually about 20 is the sweet spot. Anything beyond that is more than sufficient enough. But considering other factors here, like a good lifting mechanism, as you can see here in this little area that says LI, this is lifting index, about a -4 or lower is what you would be looking for. This would, like I said, this environment looks suitable. And if we were to, for example, go a little bit further out towards the east, let's try and lock in right here. Let's look a little further out towards the east. Good example, let's hit this area up here. Tornado threats more marginal, environment a little less suited here. Lifting mechanisms not that strong, instability pretty limited. Speed shear is still there, and I think that's why we still have a chance towards these regions. But like I said, I'm pretty skeptical at this point. Lapse rates are subpar to even poor, I would go as far as to say at this point right now. So like I said, we'll have to just wait and see how things pan out as we go throughout Tuesday evening here. Now let's get towards day 6 right here. We'll speed this up a bit. As you can see, this is a look at the trough that's going to be the big catalyst behind our severe weather threat here. As we go through the day Saturday, we'll see this positively tilted trough come in, and this is also going to cause some big time winter weather over here towards the Midwest. So like I said, we'll be live for this too, just like we will for tomorrow's event. But as you can see here, looks like for the most part we have a linear mode of storms here. Anywhere from Tennessee southward looks like is where the greatest severe threat is going to exist. And this looks like this has the potential to even linger into the overnight hours as well. We'll watch that frontal boundary come through, and then after that, the severe weather threat is done. Now, looking at the environment as a whole here, I would say, especially towards peak time, I would say the strongest indicator of severe weather is going to be right along this short wave that pops up here. Again, like I said, it kind of has that linear look to it. We're going to move the 500 back real quick so that way we can get a look at the directional shear once again. Definitely a dominant northeastward motion for the most part. There's a little bit of a turn to the north here too to go along with this, so that does lead me to have a little bit of increased concern for that tornado threat, especially towards the northern half of that slight risk. Really, a lot depends on that warm sector, which seems to be pretty abundant, and also it vects pretty far to the north in this case, so the threat already looks just a tiny bit better. And then on top of that, the winds at the mid levels of the atmosphere appear to be much stronger to go along with this. In some cases, we had reports of even the mid level getting all the way up to about 80 to 90 knots. So this mid level jet is really like screaming at this point. So if we were to go ahead and take a look at the low level jet, the environment looks a little bit better. A little bit more of that north and south look that I tend to look for when it comes to severe weather. Still have a dominant northeastward component, but just that little bit of turn, which can sometimes uptrend or downtrend at the very last minute here, does lead me to think that there might be a greater severe threat Saturday just off of this alone here. We're going to go ahead and look at those temperatures here. Here's a look at our warm sector, and you can clearly see here 60 plus degree temperatures, getting into even the mid 60s for northern parts of the states of Alabama and Mississippi at this point. Louisiana is a hotbed at this point here, so I would expect the environment to be nice and ripe, more than capable of producing severe weather at this point here. We can coincide that perfectly along with our dew points here. So moist sector, moisture advex to the north quite nicely here, even getting into central parts of Tennessee where we're getting into those 60-degree dew points, which is what I would consider to be the sweet spot. Then, of course, as we look at our instability here. Now, at this range, I'm not really a big fan of looking at instability, to be honest. The reason why is the global models, they've done a pretty good job as of late, but I really prefer to look at the convective models. They give a little bit better detail in regards to our cape. But the fact that we're seeing this signal about 4 days out definitely piques my interest a bit more. And there's a lot of model agreement along with this. I know I haven't shown the euro in this one, but when I did a model comparison on it earlier, they were looking pretty concurrent. They were looking very congruent, so to speak. So as a whole here, we combine our hodiograph here, where we're looking for a loop at the 0 to 3 range. It's this little pink area right here. We have that in combination with our surface cape, where we're well above 1,000 joules per kilogram. Look at that right here. This looks pretty notable as well, because like I said, the 0 to 3 loop is very important. We do have a little bit of drop off at that 3rd kilometer there, but nonetheless though, if we were to go ahead and look at the sickle here, and then look at our shear parameter here on the skew T that goes along with it, 28 knots at the surface to 1 kilometer range, 30 at surface to 3. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good look as a whole here. Also, lift index is really good. Also, instability is sufficient. So already, just based off of this one hodiograph that I've looked at now, I have a little bit more confidence in the severe weather threat Saturday. Now, do I think this could get upgraded? Time will only tell. But from what I can see still, like I said, it looks like this threat also can linger into the overnight, but with the parameters being the way they are now, an enhanced risk can't be ruled out. I would really lean more into keeping the slight at this current moment in time. This is, of course, the lunchtime models here, so we'll have to see how things ultimately pan out with this, but there's a lot of unknowns with this. But in either case, I'm really thinking that for now, Tuesday is going to remain a slight risk, or Wednesday, excuse me, is going to remain a slight risk. And Saturday is kind of up in the air, but slight risk for now. An enhanced risk would not surprise me, but it probably won't be before day 3 before we get that upgrade, if it happens. That being said, though, appreciate any of you tuned in. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment. Any questions you want to ask, feel free. And I'll see you in the next one.